Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opus Well Style Podcast. My name is Iván Watanabe. I'm here with my partner, Evan Wohl. Evan, what's going on, man? Good to see you. Been a long time.
Again. It's been a few minutes. I'm excited for this one, though.
Yeah, for sure. We've got on a guest that has more energy than most, I would say, always bringing it in our conversations. A good friend, client, and just all-around great guy, Laurence Anthony. Laurence, what's going on, man? Good to see you.
It is such a pleasure. You know, with that intro, I now find that there's a lot of pressure to live up to this. So the energy is going to have to be at a 10. But no, listen, you both, it is such a pleasure to be here. I love what you both are doing. Been a fan. I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So Laurence is the founder and CEO and head coach for Go Further Coaching. We wanted to have you on today to just talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in the space, how you're doing some individual coaching, but also kind of the value you're bringing to organizations. And what I found particularly interesting these days is sort of your thought process and a lot of what you're bringing to the table in the AI side and how that's kind of going into the corporate space. So, but before we start, why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about you, kind of the company, what you've been up to? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I could go into the whole origin story, but I think if anyone were to say, Laurence, what do you do? What does Go Further Coaching do? And you guys are catching me at such an amazing time. I know we'll get into this, but I think the constant, I know it sounds like a cliche, but the constant, consistent factor that every single individual and organization experiences is change. I'm not immune to that. And I've found myself, and the company has found itself in a unique position, which we have become the kind of guides for change, right? We are experiencing the most rapid change. Again, another cliche, but really when you think about AI, when you think about change adoption, when you think about what is happening globally from a technological standpoint, from a professional corporate standpoint, even interrelationships, there's a period of change that is happening that is unparalleled. Almost everyone has a universal aversion to change. It's fight, flight, or freeze. So when I started Go Further Coaching, it was really about coaching one-on-one individuals and organizations. And I laid out a plan for what I really wanted us to do. But because it's either adapt or die, what I found myself in is this amazing niche of guiding folks with change. Change creates chaos, right? What I end up doing with Go Further Coaching is create clarity, right? So it's taking clarity, creating clarity for folks who are experiencing a lot of chaos or uncertainty. No one likes to feel uncertain. It makes them feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. My job, what we do is we make people feel a little bit more comfortable and navigate through that discomfort.
Yeah. And as you said, today, change is happening at a pace that is unparalleled, right? And so, creating a space for that is never been more valuable than it is now. So I'm excited to kind of hear a little bit more about how you're doing that for either individuals or organizations. Again, the business has morphed, over the last year or two. So just kind of share a little bit about that.
Yeah. And you know what? I was going to say to you, it had to morph, but that's not true. I chose to lean into it morphing. And I think why that's important is because it's easy to be comfortable. It's easy to say, hey, this is the plan that I've had. This is how I built the business, or this is the relationship I wanted to get into, or these are the partnerships that I wanted to explore. That's deviating from my plan. I'm not going to do it. I'll bring you both into this, a little peek behind the curtains. We're in June now. Back in March, I can confidently say was the month that my company and myself experienced the most amount of change since I probably started the company. And I launched a company. The soft launch was late 23, but really a true launch was January 24. I came into this game, so to speak. My first big client was United Airlines, right? Not many folks can say that when they launch a business, they've got, yeah, dude, come on. We walk in Rookie of the Year, right? But what ends up happening is you do so well and you're like, oh, this is feeling great. And then turbulence happened. So I think you catch me at such a great time. In that March, we experienced all the turbulence. And I was like, wait a second, what's happening? We had a great takeoff, right? We've been ascending. Why do we feel this? But I think when you then relate it to a flight, if we keep this metaphor, almost every flight, you're going to experience turbulence. When do turbulence happen? You're going through clouds, disruption, or when you are trying to get to another altitude. March for me was we had outgrown what we had been doing. Mm-hmm. And so we had to experience going from 20,000, 25,000 to what does 30, 35, 40,000 look like? In between that space is a tremendous amount of turbulence, change, and discomfort. What do most people do? nah, I'm staying at this level, right? That's just not the way that I am. That's not the way I'm constructed. So I had to sit with, what do I need? What do the people that I've met and organizations that I've met need? And how do I service them? Essentially, what was our offering? And I couldn't answer that question before. I think a year ago I could. But again, when you're going to another altitude, you're playing at another level. It's very different when you're going from the minors to the majors. The swing is different. The pitches are different. So, okay, well, what do we do? Our offering is different. Who do we serve? We serve people who, and companies who are navigating a lot of change, who are adopting AI, who are having change resistant within organizations. How do we do that? We do that through emotional intelligence. We do that through using EQI assessments. We do that through the secret sauce being me. And what outcome do we provide? We provide an outcome in which, when you do navigate from that altitude that you're at to the altitude that you really want to go to, right? We get you to navigate through the discomfort to a place where you have more clarity. Now, that's a challenging thing to say, and it's a challenging thing for me. I'm not afraid to say this. Gents, there was fear in March. But I think that's part of being a solopreneur, part of being an entrepreneur, is acknowledging my favorite four-letter F word, fear, and then saying, okay, I'm not going to be fearless. That's impossible. How do I fear less in order to get where I'm going? And that happened all in March. And the minute that I embraced that, it's no coincidence that things started to happen. More contracts being signed, more conversations being had, right? Because indecision is a decision. So for us, it was, okay, what decision are we making? Where are we going?
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that it's less about a tactical use of AI and more about how people are actually thinking?
Evan, you're not just great looking, you're also smart. I love where you said that. It's true. Most people are spending time on the technical aspect, and that's very important. You know, Evan, you couldn't have teed me up any better. I was doing some thinking about this over the last week, and I think we're going to have a reel or something come up on LinkedIn this week that talks about this, is if you've got an organization that is technically proficient, right, in AI or anything within that realm, but from an emotional aspect is deficient, all you're going to have is a bunch of really smart, technically sound individuals with low EQ and disengagement. But if you've got folks who are really high EQ, but low technically proficient, then what you're going to have is a bunch of emotional people who are high EQ, but low tech and aren't going to be able to create the outcomes. So you're absolutely right. I'm not spending time in just a technical aspect. What I'm spending time is the human element, and the most important asset that every single company, organization, brand has, their human capital. How do we get human capital to be passionate about what they're doing? If the leaders are passionate, but the employees and the team aren't, it doesn't matter. Now you're trying to pull. If you can get everyone to be and match your passion, then you're not doing any pulling. You actually end up chasing your team, and you end up everyone trying to catch up with each other. It creates an amazing arms race within the organization.
Is it right now that companies or employees are just feeling like they're either dragging their feet, or there's obviously a concern about being replaced by AI? So I would imagine that there's a little bit of either distrust, or if I adopt this technology too quickly and too well, that and I have a way to implement this for the company, that they're going to replace me. Is that fear existing? Are you encountering that when you're going into companies? And if so, like, how are you sort of addressing that? Because it has to be adopted. Otherwise, they're going to be replaced with somebody that will adopt it, right? So it's sort of a double-edged sword.
Iván, you're spot on. And I love what you said there. Is it the adoption or the fear of the adoption? This has become somewhat ubiquitous. I've heard at almost every conference or talk that I've been at. It's, you're not going to be replaced by AI. Finish it with me. You're going to be replaced by someone who knows that.
Who uses AI.
I've heard it so much. I'm like, hey guys, can we get it? Can we get some new talking point here?
Oh yeah.
Now, there's a strong element of truth to that, but it comes back to me, what I genuinely believe is one of the fundamental factors that we don't like to admit, which is fear. And it is at the basis of almost everything we do. Mm-hmm. Fear that AI is going to replace my job. Fear that someone else who utilizes AI better is going to replace me. Fear that I'm going to get left behind. Fear that I don't know how to do it. It all comes down to fear. AI isn't the transformation. The fear of AI is. So how do we get folks to acknowledge it first and foremost? And by the way, in this country, here in the States, we don't like to admit fear. We see fear as a weakness. We see it as a vulnerability. I'm not afraid. I've got it. But that actually is what successful individuals do. They acknowledge it, and then they say, okay, how can I reduce its impact on me? So from an AI perspective, what I've been doing, we had an engagement with Google back in February and RBC, and phenomenal engagement at Google's head office, and RBC was a client, and they said, Laurence, we could bring in anyone to talk about AI adoption. The reason that we have you and we need you is because you're bringing the EQ aspect, the emotional aspect. No one is talking about that. Everyone's talking about how to utilize AI better, how to create better prompts, how to do all these things. But we forget the most important aspect is, how do we speak to the fundamental feeling that every person within a team is experiencing? And how do we get them to be a little bit more comfortable in that period of discomfort so they can perform?
Yeah, I mean, until the employees get to that place where they feel comfortable and feel like there's some level of security and some level of I guess how to address the fear, you know, in a more productive manner, right? Which is essentially what you're helping them do. You know, the companies are not going to move as fast as they want to, right? Employees are, the retention there is going to be is going to be less, and you're going to have employees that are fearful and upset and not enjoying the work between now and whenever that place happens, right? So just it needs to be improved, right? There's no other option.
Without it being improved, you know what you have? You have stagnation. And one of my favorite quotes is by one of my favorite writers, Fitzgerald, Great Gatsby, one of the goats, and he said, "The mark of an intelligent mind," I'll paraphrase, but the mark of a really intelligent mind is the ability to hold two opposing ideas simultaneously while still being able to function. So it is that last part that I think is the missing piece in the key, because many of us can hold two opposing ideas. We do it all the time, right? But what that ends up creating for so many people is stagnation, or what that ends up creating is paralysis, because paralysis by overanalysis. So it's the ability to hold two separate thoughts and ideas and say, okay, how am I still going to function? Example, we are going through change. That is scary. How can I function? We are getting to another altitude. There's turbulence, disruption. How do I still function? It's holding both. What ends up happening with most teams and organizations, and I just think people who aren't able to grasp this really well, is they focus on one or the other, or they focus on both and become overwhelmed. So it's the ability to hold space for both and say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I'm not at yet. What tools do I need to get? Or how do I enrich myself in order to perform and avoid stagnation, but actually be able to excel?
And when you're coming into organizations, do you find that the employees are excited to see you? They're excited for this conversation. They wanna have this dialogue, or do you feel like this is there's a little bit of apprehension at first, and then they kind of settle down once they know that you actually are there to improve their lives and the company's situation? Is it how are they seeing it when they see you walk in the room?
It's such a great question, because if I think about my experiences, both recent and historical, I have found, again, these two opposing thoughts exist at the same time. I have found that most folks are apprehensive when they are walking into a room, or when they get that invite on their calendar. Hey, we're going to be doing this training or this conference or this talk. There's, what's that word? There's fear. There's distrust. There's apprehension. I think if you're aware of that, you can speak to that first, right? Great leaders, great speakers, like myself, great coaches, great individuals are able to speak to that first. If you don't speak to that, then all you're doing is coming in with either a pre-made story or a script, and you're now trying to force it on folks. You got to connect first. That's the first part. The second part of that is, a professor told me this a long time ago, and I love this, when I was getting my second degree in teaching years and years ago. And she said, Laurence, adults are nothing but children in grown-up bodies.
Yeah, I like that.
Right. And I think for me, I've always tried to take that approach. How can I speak to that person I can't see when I'm in a room? The minute you do that, you've got them. And you build connection, you build trust. And I do that by sharing parts of myself. I'll get vulnerable in the room. They're apprehensive before they get in because of any PTSD. Maybe they've had trainings in the past that weren't great. Maybe they've had some speakers come in who stink. Look, I was at an event. You know what? I'm not ashamed to say this. I'm not even worried about it. I'll say it frankly. I was at an event back in May, and it was an HR event, and I was an attendee. And this might ruffle feathers, but I'll say it was by far one of the worst speakers I've ever seen. Now, I can say that because I actually told some of the event organizers about this after, right? And it wasn't just me. I looked over to my right, and I said to the woman to my right, I said, "Is the speaker nervous?" She goes, "She's not great." I said, "No, she's awful." And that was a universal experience. Why was she awful? It was about herself. She hadn't connected to the audience. What most, I think, whether it's change leaders or consultants or coaches or anyone who's trying to kind of create some kind of disruption or change or elevation, what bad people at that job do is they focus on how to sound important, how to be important. What great people at that job do is, how do I connect? How do I build a bridge of trust between these people who might be apprehensive and who maybe haven't earned trust? How do I create that? Once you've done that, you could maybe make an argument the world is flat. Now, you might lose some people, but you're going to get some people who might say, right? But you only get that you only get that with building trust. Trust and connection is where it starts.
Laurence, I feel like you have a unique perspective on this whole topic of, call it AI doomerism or AI job replacement. Frankly, I've gone back and forth on it. I'm not buying it. I'm much more on the optimism side. And obviously many jobs and careers and industries will change, but I'm curious, what are you actually seeing in the real world working with these companies implementing AI? Are you seeing jobs being replaced, or does it show up in a little different way?
I think I would have to be either a liar or I'd have to be naive to say that it has not had an impact. We're seeing hiring freezes in many sectors, particularly quote unquote white collar sectors. We know this, right? The financial services sector, legal sectors. We're seeing that. I believe that is going to increase. I do. However, what I am seeing is, because of that, if you think about it, look at what a lot of Gen Zers and Gen Alphas are doing now. They are going toward less tech. They're going towards more connection. They want to be on their phone less. They're going to bars and listening rooms where you actually have to interact. We have a deep desire to connect with each other. That's why I say, some of the restaurants here in New York, you try getting on those Resi notification lists, they're booked out, right? Nolan's movie coming out next month, and this month rather, people are already they were selling tickets for that last year, right? Folks want to connect with each other and they want to have these experiences together. What I'm seeing is, I think we're going to have disruption. But again, to answer your question, Evan, if you're going from altitude 20,000 to 40,000, what is the cost of that, right? You're no longer flying at a low altitude, so your view is going to change. You're still going to have a view. It's just going to be a much different view. And you have to be okay getting to that level. I know we're going to have disruption. I know we're going to have hiring freezes. I know we're seeing layoffs. Absolutely. But again, there's an opportunity there, right? The cost of inaction is always higher than the cost of transformation. Always, right? And I think a lot of people are just worried about, if I transform, what about this? What about this? But what happens if you don't?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At least you can take back some of the control, right? And it's not like people don't see this generally coming, right? It's not like it happened overnight and they invented the car and the guy that was, riding the horse or cleaning up after it, was out of work the next day, right? That you see the changes coming. There's an opportunity to sort of adopt the technology, understand how you can either reinvent yourself or how your place might fit, but the change is coming in some form or fashion, right? So, my plea is to have people sort of embrace it as best that they can and then figure out how do we fit into it. But it's not like, when all those changes happened, when Uber replaced taxi drivers, that was an entire industry disrupted, and those folks found some other place within the workforce to go. I don't necessarily know what that replacement looks like, but it's going to happen regardless of whether or not you want it to or not. I think is basically what I'm coming down to.
Well, and Iván, you're absolutely right. It is going to happen. It's inevitable. And that's why I coined this phrase, if it's inevitable, make it immediate, right? I've been saying that for about 15 years. And then I've refined it over the last kind of 2 months. We're talking about even the change I've had to go through with the company. I've refined that the change is inevitable, so make it immediate. That doesn't mean you need to create that immediate change. That means, though, you need to start thinking about what you could do. If you notice, I said could, not should. Most people, most organizations live within should. We should be better at AI. We should adopt this faster. We should get our teams to do X, Y, and Z. All should does is live within expectations. That's all should is about. Should is about third-party expectations, or we should be chasing what this other company is doing. If you spend time in should, all it does is create more pressure. If you actually go to your point is, okay, it's coming. What could I do? Could creates action. Should creates paralysis. So if you start asking, what could I do? That now puts you in a position where you start to think about ideas and you start to think about what action items could I do? Because you think about, why do we love like kids with imaginations, or why do we love creative or artists? Is because they're constantly thinking of new things. They're thinking from a place of could, right? Not from a place of should. Who thinks of a place from should is that artist who's got a great first album, or that writer who's got a great first book. And then you know what they live in? My second book should be better than my first. Mm-hmm. And that's where the sophomore syndrome comes in. But if it's like, okay, what could I do next? That creates creativity, possibility, allows the synapses start firing. That's what I would love to see more teams do. And that's what I bring into rooms. And I really try and invest this within every room I'm in is, team, let's start thinking about could. Let's start going back to ideas and imagination and possibilities, because some things are inevitable, but it doesn't mean that you can't have action.
Mm. One of the things I love about your perspective and how you're talking about it is the emotional intelligence part. I feel like is just never spoken about, because when I think about AI, at least currently, it's not self-directed, right? It is directed by humans. And so we are still in the loop, and where AI goes is a function of our taste. And our taste, I think I think I could use the analogy of taste is similar to my emotional intelligence of what will, this person like, or what will the business like, what will my consumers like. And so I love that that's the conversation of getting better at emotional intelligence so that you have better taste and can better kind of tune into what do people want, what will work in the new world of AI.
Mm-hmm. Evan, you cannot drive it home any better. I'm big on the EQ aspect. I'm EQI certified. I believe in that. I lead with emotion. I lead with vulnerability. That's just the way I always am in everything that I do. And I think it's what's allowed me to have great relationships, great friendships, great business relationships. And something you said there is really important, is that it is human directed. Mm-hmm. So we are the chefs, right? We're the chefs in the kitchen, right? And I think that's one of the most important aspects is we often forget that when we step into the kitchen, we've got a bunch of different ingredients. We've got a bunch of tools. What do I want to create? What could I do with the salt? How could I use the salt a little bit less? How could I use a little bit more garlic? How could I do these things instead of, well, what should my meal look like? Right. Mm-hmm. And, I'm at this place now where we're going to see a lot more consulting firms or organizations really try and create certifications for C-suite, HR individuals, professionals, in order to get them to understand change and be AI proficient. Mm-hmm. But I thought about this last night as I was prepping for another issue of our newsletter. I was like, well, reading lyrics doesn't make you a singer, right? And buying a certification from any of these big consulting firms doesn't necessarily make you a change leader, right? There's a big difference between I can understand the lyrics and now I can get on stage and perform them. Mm-hmm. And so what's really important is remembering that it is human driven, and everyone needs either a coach or a thought leader or someone who can say, okay, let's interpret the lyrics. What kind of song do we want to sing? Because there are covers of songs. So it's okay, how do we want to cover this song? How do we want to use these prompts to create something a little bit different, a little bit better? But it is human driven.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm a big Gary Vaynerchuk proponent, and so I subscribe to his podcast. And today's episode that he posted was why human relationships are the ultimate ROI. Right. And I think, I am a huge believer in the human spirit, in people in general. I just think we are undefeated. And again, just this opportunity for change and to take control of it, and to say, I love the could, not should, because that's where creativity comes from, right? It will allow us to continue to morph and adapt the same way that you did in March to say, hey, what could we be doing here? What is the market telling us that we that we need to be, you know, sort of creating at this point? And then why do we want to do that? I just think it's a beautiful change in the way you're sort of adjusting it, and again, coaching other organizations to do the same. It's very cool.
What happens every 4? Thank you. What happens every 4 years that we all get glued to?
President.
The Olympics.
Well, yeah, Evan's going president. He's right. You're absolutely right. You're both right. But Iván picked it up right away. The human element. But you're right. There is another human element with the general election. But the Olympics, right? I mean, we've got the World Cup happening here, but the Olympics, I think, are on an even greater stage. And if we don't have human stories and narratives, then we don't have investments in the Olympics. The reason that we all get teary-eyed or we cheer for someone we haven't heard of, right, 3 weeks earlier, is because we know their story. It's because we know their narrative, right? So to your point, Iván, human interactions, I believe, are the most important. Going back to Evan's point, it is still human-driven. The most important relationship we have is with each other. We are truly all connected. I'm going to nerd out here for a moment, but I was at the American Museum of Natural History last week. As I'm walking throughout the museum, they had these amazing exhibits, and this one exhibit was essentially on humanity, how we're all connected, and how we all share these common traits. Now we look different, we talk different, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my gosh, we legitimately are all connected in some way, shape, or form, even to a small thread. It is that connection that allows us to be triumphant. It's that connection which unfortunately also allows us to hurt each other, but it's that connection that allows us to come up with creative ideas and solve creative solutions, right? And do that in a way that is unique to us.
For sure. You know, listen, you've shared so many great insights, and sort of your take, again, is I think refreshing and new around the EQ aspect of organizations and how important that is. As we kind of wrap up, like, are there any things in particular that you really want the audience to kind of understand from you? Is there anything in particular that you want to make sure that they take away from our conversation today?
Yeah, I think what's really important is, you know, I'll dive in on this again, which is the relationship that we have with fear. It is, I believe, one of the things that we avoid and we don't talk about as much. And I think it is not until we understand, what am I afraid of? What is causing this disruption and this discomfort within me? So it takes an incredible amount of self-awareness. So what I would argue is that, I mean, any therapist will tell you, as individuals, we could be self-aware, and that only leads to better relationships and better life overall. But I would also say for organizations and for businesses, how self-aware of yourself are you as a business? And it is when you are that self-aware, you get to ask yourself, what's the relationship that we have with our managers and our leaders? And what is a relationship that they have with our clients and our customers? How could we improve that relationship? It is, you know, everyone's talking about the presidency. There we go. It is having that state of the union. I think every company, I would argue every company, every individual, every relationship, romantic, personal, whatever, should have a state of the union quite consistently, where you ask yourself, what are we doing well as a team, as a company? What are we doing well individually? And what are we not doing so well in both of those categories? And you answer that then allows you to say, okay, what could we do next? How do we take this data point and how do we create with it? Most people are too afraid to do that because they don't want to have the answer, or because they're afraid that the answer they're going to get is not going to align with the answer that they have in their mind. So once you're able to remove that and say, I have the courage to maybe hear something I don't want to hear, and I have the courage to maybe just have another perspective. Once you do that, then the possibilities really are endless. You get to create more. And we move from my favorite 4-letter word of fear to probably my favorite F word, which is freedom. When you move from that, it gets you to just be a lot freer in terms of how you operate and what you're allowed to do and how you excel.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, listen, man, I really, really appreciate the conversation today. For the listening audience, if they want to find out more about you, more about your coaching programs, any organizations that are looking for a brilliant speaker to come on and sort of reshape the organization, where can they find you?
yeah, you can find us online. We're all over LinkedIn. You can find us at gofurthercoaching.com. You can find any of my like coaching thoughts and workout videos on IG. And I think what's really important is, the landscape of this industry has become really saturated, right? There are a lot of quote unquote coaches. One of the reasons that I went to go get certified, I'm a PCC level coach and just got accepted to actually coach the next crop of coaches with this academy, was because I want to infuse integrity into this industry. But I tell everyone, I'm not an executive coach. I'm an outcome creator, right? I don't deliver a service, I deliver results. And that's what I think is really important. I think a lot of people are somewhat frustrated with just all the services that are being offered. And, for you both, I would argue the same thing. I have the pleasure of working with you. You don't just offer services, you deliver results. And I think that's what separates, right, great financial advisors, great wealth advisors from Joe Schmo. And so if anyone's looking for an outcome, if anyone's looking to go from the altitude they're at to getting to another higher altitude to eventually just reach a destination that they want to get to, then yeah, you can find us online, and that's what we do. We create outcomes.
I love, man. Well, thank you so much for joining today. We really, really appreciate you, and thanks for the time. And I know it was super valuable for the audience. So always great to see you. Thanks for bringing the energy. It was up there, my friend.
Thanks, Laurence.
Thanks, guys. Happy to do this with you guys anytime. Love what you all do, and keep doing it. You're doing such a phenomenal job.
I appreciate it,
Thank
man.
you.
And to you, the listening audience, thanks for tuning in. Please click subscribe below to be notified when we release our next episode. Appreciate you guys.